And joining me now is Sanjay Bhattacharyya, who is the Indian ambassador to Turkey. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. It's good to have you here.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. A Turkish senior lawmaker and you have also said that Turkey and India are natural allies in the 21st century. What connections and bonds make the two countries natural allies? Where does that come from?
So it's really a very old partnership. We are civilizational partners. And in the first part of the 20th century, there were a number of exchanges that consolidated this bond between India and Turkey. When you had the Balkan Wars, there was a medical mission that came from India. 22 doctors and assistants who came from Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh. And they came to Istanbul and they set up two camps, one in Omerli and one in Çanakkale. The mission was led by Dr. M.A. Ansari, whose grandnephew, Hamid Ansari, became the Indian vice president and visited Turkey. A second one that comes to mind from that time was when Turkey was engaged in its nationalist movement. There was a great deal of empathy in India for that movement. And Mahatma Gandhi, who everybody knows, actually rallied the Indians together, Indians of all communities, and they contributed to the Turkish nationalist movement cause. 128,000 pounds were raised and sent to Ataturk. He used some of that for the war effort, and the rest of it he put into the capital of Ishbank. So our connections are really very, very deep. I think the 21st century provides an entirely new framework for our partnership, because the 21st century is a time when both India and Turkey have had fantastic growth, social transformation. We are leaders in our region and have the ability to lead global affairs. And therefore, my Prime Minister says that's what makes us the natural partners of the 21st century.
So, but Turkey's trade with India stood at a modest $8 billion in 2018, and this trade is in favor of India when we take a look at it. Which areas could the two countries, you think, further develop to expand that number and maybe balance it a bit?
I would say that $8 billion is not so modest, because that makes India Turkey's 10th largest trading partner. We had set a target of $10 billion when Prime Minister Modi and President Erdogan met in 2017, and the target was set for 2020. But the way we are going, we should be able to reach that target this year, because last year we grew at 22%. And once we reach that target, which was set by our leaders, I am firmly of the opinion that we should look for a more ambitious target, something like doubling within the next 5 years. We don't have an FTA.
How do you plan to do that?
Yeah, so we don't have an FTA, but we commissioned a study which has now come to the consensus that the two nations should negotiate an FTA. And when Trade Minister Ruslan Pekcan was in India last December, they talked about it, and I hope that when we have the next meeting of the Joint Commission, we will announce the negotiations. And that will give a huge boost to the trade relations between our two countries. But I think when we look at our economic relations, we should look at it in conjunction with the investments. And that's another story that we shouldn't lose track of, because Turkey has had fantastic growth over the last 30 odd years, as has India. Today, we are the fastest growing economy. Today, Indian investments in Turkey are in the range of about $500 million in chemicals, automobiles, farm equipment, pharmaceuticals, textiles. And similarly, there are Turkish companies which are engaged in this huge Make in India project. So we have glass, we have white goods, we have construction sector, which is very active, logistics. And there is so much more that we can do. And I think the dialogue that is on between the business houses on both sides shows us that the direction.
But do you agree that the current status falls short of the potential of trade between the two countries?
I'm a diplomat. I always believe we should do much more. And I think that's exactly what I think we are doing. We are saying that in the next 5 years, we should double our trade. We are saying that in the next few years, we should quadruple the level of investments on each side. The opportunities are huge.
So you're in touch with businessmen
Oh,
on
yes,
both
yes.
parties,
Yeah.
right?
We have a joint business council, which is between the business chambers. We have regular meetings at the ministerial and official levels. And I'm very, very happy with the momentum that is there in our bilateral relations.
Okay. Let's talk about a bit of politics. One of President Erdogan's most popular slogans is that the world is bigger than five, meaning that the United Nations Security Council, with its 5 permanent members, falls short of meeting or tackling today's challenges the world is facing now. So I know that India has also been critical of that system. Do you believe there's a room for the two countries to cooperate on reforming the United Nations, or is this too ambitious?
We have a great understanding on this particular issue. We both recognize that the United Nations, of which we are both members, has played a very critical role in peace and development. But at the same time, we also recognize that it has not been able to fully address the aspirations of the developing world. And more importantly, it has not adjusted to the enormous changes that have taken place in the global systems ever since the end of the Second World War. And therefore, there is a need for reform. Recently, as you are aware, the United Nations Secretary General had announced some internal changes in the way the UN functions, in the way it relates to host governments. And I think those changes were very welcome. They're extremely important, they're very welcome, but we need to take it further. And I think central to the other reforms that are necessary is that there has to be greater democracy in decision making. And I think when President Erdogan says the world is greater than one, that is what he's referring to. That's very central to what we do.
So you say the decision-making mechanism is not democratic?
Not entirely, because we know what the UN Security Council is. We also think that there has to be a greater sense of responsibility in responding to peacekeeping demands, and also a greater ability in responding to the development aspirations. So democracy combined with responsibility and ability. And in this, we sincerely believe that all member countries must be taken on as entire responsible members of the United Nations. We have had a number of suggestions, and I don't see the day too far away when India and Turkey can play a very dominant role and become global leaders in this particular agenda.
How are you planning to do that?
We have ongoing discussions at the UN. As you know, it's a body where we have had very close collaboration on a number of issues. Some of it will have to happen within the UN, and a lot of it happens in the various other bodies. For instance, in the WTO, where we talk about trade, in the UNFCCC, where we talk about climate change, or the FATF, for instance, where we talk about counterterrorism.
Okay. So Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, he spoke at the 11th Ambassadors Conference and announced a new Asia initiative. It is called Asia Anew. If you like, let's listen to what he said and we'll continue to talk.
Asya dünyanın ekonomik merkezi haline gelmektedir.
Asia is becoming the economic center of the world. The international community vies for greater involvement in Asia. Turkey has deep roots in this most dynamic region of the world. Being Asian and in Asia is as important as being European and in Europe for us.
So he said being Asian in Asia is as important as being European in Europe for us. That's what the Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu says. What do you make of that? How will this new initiative affect Turkey-India relations in the coming future?
We've seen an increasing thrust towards Asian countries. There was the set of priority countries that the Trade Ministry had announced last year, and India, as you know, was one of them. It really recognizes the enormous changes, the developments that have taken place in the Far East and in Southeast Asia and in South Asia in particular. I mentioned earlier that India today is the fastest growing economy, and this is a natural corollary that when Turkey looks for partners in the world today, it has to look for partners that have weight, and India has weight.
So, Mr. Ambassador, we all know that Kashmir's autonomy has been revoked after 7 decades, and this caused great concern on international community as well as Turkey. Turkey also expressed its concern about the latest. What do you make of that? What would you say?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the international media because they haven't understood what the changes are. What has happened is that the government of India has made certain provisions of the Article 370 non-operational and has introduced a new bill for the reorganization of the state of Jammu and Kashmir to create 2 union territories, one of Ladakh and one of Jammu and Kashmir. These are administrative measures for having better administrative convenience, governance, to bring about greater development and provide security. And this is something that is a purely internal procedure in accordance with the Indian Constitution. So I find it very interesting that there are people who think that this has wider ramifications idea.
So do you believe could Turkey possibly play a mediating role if the parties agreed just to diffuse tensions in the region?
I think we have not got mediation on the table. Okay. We have never asked any country to play a mediatory role. The tensions that are there in the region are because of the export of terrorism, cross-border terrorism, from another country.
All right. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on Straight Talk. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you very much.